Well, welcome to today's webinar from Conversica. This is Carl Landers. I'm the CMO at Conversica, and I'm happy to welcome onto today's webcast Charles Eichenbaum from Microsoft. Charles, welcome, and please say hello so we know you're out there.
Hi, thanks, Carl.
Great. Good to hear your voice. Thank you to our audience for joining today. We are going to hear about how Microsoft is using AI in marketing, and Charles will take us through that presentation in a moment and introduce himself. I wanted to say that I saw Charles present on this topic at the recent Marketo Summit, and it was a really compelling presentation. And we asked Charles to come and share it with you, a wider audience, and he was happy to do it. And I just wanted to thank you, Charles, for doing that. And so to our audience, get ready for a great presentation. We are going to have a question and answer session at the end, so feel free to ask your questions as we go through, and we will get to those in the Q&A session. Without further ado, Charles, let me turn it over to you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for our audience. And we look forward to hearing about how Microsoft is using AI in marketing.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Excited to be here and talk about how we're using artificial intelligence in marketing at Microsoft. Quick, brief introduction. So I run marketing technology within Microsoft's Global Demand Center. And what the Global Demand Center is tasked with is generating demand for our sellers for many of our B2B products. So things like Office, Microsoft Azure, Windows, etc. And we've recently started using, over the past couple of years, artificial intelligence to help drive revenue up and decrease costs. So today my presentation will go through how we're doing that. But first, what I'd like to do is start with a story, a true story, about these three women told through the movie Hidden Figures. And if you haven't seen it, it's an incredible movie from a multitude of different perspectives. So I would highly recommend it. It's a true story. It takes place in the early 1960s during the space race with Russia. And NASA is trying to figure out how to get the first American into orbit. And these three women, Mary Jackson, Catherine Goebel, and Dorothy Vaughan, are computers. This was their title, human computers. If you were to open the NASA corporate directory back then, it would have computers right next to their name. And it didn't really have machine computers, so those were just starting to gain relevance. And so all of the calculations that NASA did to engineer and calculate trajectory and reentry, et cetera, was done by hand. And what we were trying to do is get one of the first Americans into space, John Glenn. And one of the problems was, it's great, you can get them into space, but then how do you get them back onto Earth? And the math needed to calculate the reentry trajectory had not been invented yet. And so Catherine Goebel went and, as part of the movie and the story, helped create that math and figure out what are the formulas that we needed to go and employ so that we could have John successfully reenter the atmosphere without burning up. Now, the problem was that math, once it was invented, it was too complex to do by hand fast enough, because weather conditions were changing and the window of reentry were changing, and so all of those things had to be recalculated real time. So NASA bought one of the first International Business Machine computers, or IBM, a mainframe. It was giant. It was big as a huge room, but nobody really knew how to use it. And so Dorothy went and taught herself Fortran and taught herself how to use the computer and taught the other human computers at the time how to use it. And so they were the ones that were armed with the computer to go and recalculate the trajectory. And so this was actually, and spoiler alert, they were able to get John Glenn back in successfully. And this was an interesting time in history because it was one of the first times that humans and computers combined their respective strengths to accomplish an amazing goal, to get a human into space and then back safely to Earth, something that had never been done by the US before. And it was really the start of a revolution, a new relationship between man and machine, which has gotten us where we are today. And AI is that next big evolution in humanity's relationship with technology. But we don't always call it AI. This is an example of, if you were to name the technique, machine vision, using machine learning to understand someone's face to authenticate for a computer. But we don't call it that. We call this Windows Hello, and it's used by many, many people to unlock their computer instead of a password. So another example is Netflix. When you watch a show, Netflix will recommend other shows based on what they think you're interested in. And they've done this by creating a huge database and meta tagging all of their content and employing machine learning algorithms to go and surface the next best recommendation. But they don't call it next best recommendation engine. They basically say, hey, because you watch Bloodline, you might like these others. And this has had a tremendous impact on their bottom line. They've publicly said that it's reduced churn by about 1% a year. And if you do the math, that equates to about 10% of their market capitalization. So just by employing this AI to this one scenario, they've been able to increase their market cap by 10%, which is huge. And there's a bunch of other examples of where AI is prevalent today, and you're probably using, but you don't call it AI. So video games, mobile check deposit, spam filters, airline autopilots, routing algorithms for companies to deliver packages, high-frequency trading, etc. So it really is everywhere, and it's permeating and creating value for a lot of us in our everyday lives. So why AI in marketing now? Because there's really three phenomena that have been going on. This notion of rise in connected data. So massive amounts of data sets are now being connected in the cloud. AI advancements in the math behind it, so the AI sciences, neural networks, and deep learning have really kind of helped propel it forward too. And then finally, the increase in computing power with companies like Microsoft, with Microsoft Azure, have created a lot of more computing power and then made it a lot more accessible and democratized that computing power to companies everywhere and organizations everywhere and people everywhere to be able to use these power kind of on demand. And then here's the process that we've started to apply AI to. So this is our demand creation funnel, an abbreviated version. It probably looks very similar to how you may measure your business. So we look at leads, then to marketing qualified leads. So these are leads that we say are ready to talk to a seller, to telequalified leads. So the seller says, yes, this is a good lead, I'm going to work this, down to sales qualified opportunities, or SQOs, which are opportunities or leads that have turned into opportunities that the seller says, hey, there is an interested buyer that could convert to a customer, and I'm going to work this and include it in my pipeline. And so when you look across this, there's really two areas. The first is, how do we increase our conversion rates from MQLs to SQOs, so marketing qualified leads, to sales qualified opportunities, through the use of AI-based predictive analytics. So basically scoring these and saying, or lead scoring and saying, what's the highest probability MQLs to convert to SQOs, and giving those to sales first. And then the second, once you have an MQL, you need to send it to an inside seller. So how do we, and the inside seller spends a lot of time calling and trying to reach the right person. So how do we take some cost out of that through bots and automation? So those are the two areas which we're applying different techniques. And those techniques are three areas. One are business rules, which aren't aren't necessarily AI, but they're business rules that we apply on top of the AI or before the AI. There's lead scoring, which is we use machine learning, and then bot engagement. And these three things either reduce costs, so business rules reduce costs because then you don't have to call invalid leads, etc. Lead scoring could increase revenue and decrease costs, and bot engagement can also increase revenue and reduce costs. And the way that looks on a graph is this. So I'll orient you on the left-hand side. You've got the leads risk adjusted lifetime profit. Or think about this as the probability of a lead to convert to a sales qualified opportunity. So what's the probability between 0 and 100% that this will turn into an opportunity for a seller? And on the bottom of the graph, you have, and on the left side, you have the leads that we process first and the leads that we process last. So the first thing we do is we apply business rules. So we get a lead, email address, phone number, name, bunch of leads, and we'll say, is this lead valid? Yep, it's got a valid email and a valid phone number, or nope, it's got an invalid email. We run these business rules pre-processing, and we're able to take out the leads that have bad email addresses, bad phone numbers, and other suppression rules. And then we'll move to taking the good leads and putting them on the graph, or the leads with the valid information. Now we move over to lead scoring. And the way that we used to do lead scoring is we would do rules-based, points-based lead scoring. So for instance, if you attended webinar, we would give you 10 points. If you downloaded an ebook, we would give you, for example, 5 points. And then once you crossed a certain threshold, we would send you to a seller. And the actual results ended up looking something like this, which wasn't great because here you're processing leads that are negative profitability before higher profitability. So here's an example of a lead that you would want to process last, or maybe not even call. And so that rules-based scoring had a lot of limitations. Additionally, we have capacity limits. We can't call all of the leads. And so these leads on the right, you're missing out on because the seller is not calling them. And these are clearly not profitable. So we employed machine learning to drive our lead scoring, and we got a curve that looks a lot more like this. And this is great because now we're prioritizing the most valuable leads, and we're avoiding processing leads that are unprofitable. But this is just a prediction. We specifically predict the probability of that lead to convert to a sales qualified opportunity. The problem is you don't always get that prediction correctly. And so that's where bots come in. So we'll use bots to ask leads, hey, are you actually interested or not? And sometimes they say, yeah, I'm interested. Definitely, please contact me. And so we'll move those up to the top of the queue. Other times, our predictions are wrong. And we'll ask this lead, are you interested or not? And they might say, no, I'm not. So instead of having a seller spend a bunch of time emailing and trying to contact them through LinkedIn and trying to call them on the phone only to get on a meeting to be told no, we can disposition those right away without a human ever having to be involved and move those to the bottom and continue to nurture them until they might be ready. So we're able to avoid working these leads and reduce sellers' costs and increase their productivity. On the flip side, our predictions could be, we could get a false negative. And in that case, we would be missing out on revenue. So we deploy the bots on the lower end of the spectrum, scoring spectrum as well. And sometimes, a lot of times, we'll find leads that say, hey, actually, I am interested. And we call these the diamonds in the rough. And we're able to move those up to the top and work these leads that will convert despite a initial prediction of will not. And then, as you see, we're able to deploy the bots kind of across the whole entire system and ultimately process more leads than we'd be able to with humans because of our cost constraints. And so we end up having a curve that looks like this, where we're processing really only the most valuable leads. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about lead scoring and our evolution there and what we're doing. So 2015 and before, we really started on this journey with a rules-based approach. We had no precedents here. And so what we did is we all sort of got into a room and opined about, well, if they go to an in-person event, if the lead goes to an in-person event, then that's a big buying signal because it's a big time commitment versus a webinar, which, they just have to call in from their desk and it's only an hour. So the webinars are probably less buying intense, and ebooks are probably even lower. And so we got into a room and had some passionate discussions about what that would look like. And that's where a lot of people start, is you just sort of guess and use heuristics to guess. And we ran that for a while, and then once we got enough data, we were able to build models using really powerful tools like Excel, and we were able to sort of see what actually were the characteristics of these leads, and which activities signaled buying behavior more than others. And so we refined our approach, but it still was a little bit too broad brush and not fine grained enough, because we were still relying on, a webinar. You might have a difference between a high value webinar and a low value webinar, but we couldn't get the nuance of, country by country or product by product. It would just become too hard to handle. And so that's where AI and machine learning really, really can shine through. And over the past couple of years, we've embarked on a journey to move all of our lead scoring, and that's what we've done to machine learning driven scoring. And our lead scoring AI today predicts the probability of a marketing qualified lead to convert to a sales qualified opportunity, and over a certain threshold, we'll send that to our sellers. And some really cool things about this is that it stack ranks the leads based on probability to convert, which means that if we increase the threshold, so let's say we move from a 10% to a 15% threshold, then they're always going to get higher leads, higher MQLs. They're going to get lower volume of leads, but they're going to get higher quality. The leads are also rescored in real time. So anytime a lead does something new, like visits the website or downloads an ebook or goes to an event, almost immediately it's sent to our scoring algorithm, and it will rescore the lead with that additional information. The models are also self-learning and optimized by product area. The platform that we use, it's not just a marketing platform, but it's also a sales platform. So we use that same score and platform to stack rank them in the seller's queue, which is interesting because if they don't get to a lead in 2 days, it might the customer is doing more things, we might pop it up higher or lower. So once it leaves marketing, it's not a static score. It changes over time depending on what the person does or does not do. And then finally, the AI has allowed us to create many, many models. And so we have, for every geography and every product, we have a different model because there's nuances that the machine learning models can take and capture versus what we could handle and kind of manually doing the plus minus business rules approach. Now we'll move on to how we're actually using the bots. So this is a screenshot of Conversica, and what one of the emails says, "Hi John, if you recently signed up for a trial of Microsoft Azure, we're here to help you if you have any questions getting started. We have technology specialists. That's a very important thing for our customers. to be able to talk to somebody who's a technology specialist to answer questions about getting started. Would you like me to connect you with someone on our team? And this is an example of an email that we sent out to someone who was below the threshold to send to set sales. So sales never would have called this person. And the lead responded, "Hi, sorry for not responding earlier. Actually, we're very much into Azure. We're looking at your competition, but we'd like to keep everything inside of Azure." And so this was flagged as a hot lead, and we were able to send it to a seller. And this is super important because they were talking to our competition, and a seller, Microsoft seller, never would have reached out. But now that we've been able to automate this conversation and increase the system capacity, we were able to intervene in this and get involved in the sales cycle. So we definitely would have lost this had we not had the bots to help identify this. Here's another example, same email. The response was, "Thanks, I don't need support for now. I'll let you know if I need anything." This is an example of a lead that was above the threshold that had we sent it to a seller first, then they would have spent time emailing and having to disposition, and we've automated all of that. And finally, I want to run you through a recent opportunity that was found by bots. So one of our customers was acquired through Visual Studio Online, and we're sending them email nurture. And then they signed up for a Azure trial, but were classified as low propensity based on the prediction of the model. So the MQL expired, and the bot emailed the customer. And the customer said, "Hey, actually, I'm interested in Dynamics 365 demo. Do you have, can I get some help here?" And we were able to route this as a lead to the seller. And it's interesting because now the seller has context, right? This buyer has basically interacted with two different products, Visual Studio Online and Azure, and now they want help with understanding Dynamics. And so that context, we actually send that context over to the sellers, and they're able to see, oh, okay, well, I need to get someone with Dynamics 365 expertise on the phone. And that actually helps accelerate the sales cycle because they can get them on the phone right away versus determining what the customer wants and then on the first call and then having to have a second call. And this opportunity was a 350-seat deal for about $250,000. So really, really great opportunity that the bot found. So and material to the business. So an example of a diamond in the rough. And by deploying these two techniques, lead scoring and bots, we've been able to see an increase across our products of between 30 to 60% in our conversion rate from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified opportunity. So it is having a real and meaningful impact on the business. And we actually think we can get this to probably between 100 and 150% increase as we continue to optimize and over time. So I'll take you all through 7 learnings that we've had as we've been deploying this artificial intelligence. The first thing is really think about the business outcome that you're trying to drive. AI is kind of a buzzword in the industry, and everybody wants to talk about what they're doing with AI and how cool it is. But if you start with artificial intelligence first and then try and find business scenarios, it's not going to be as successful as really understanding what's your business process and scenarios that could use AI, and then bringing in AI and applying there. So in our specific instance, we said, hey, like a human has to try and reach these people. Is there some sort of bot that we could use to automate that? And we're not very good at predicting the propensity of these to convert. How can we use AI to increase that? So those are the business outcomes that we're really looking for to reduce costs and increase revenue. Second, I'd say, kind of akin to the first one, is identify a scenario that AI is well suited for. So, for instance, AI, the scenario that we use with Conversica, AI is pretty good at determining intent in an email, whether somebody wants to talk to somebody or not, using natural language processing. But it's not good at really being able to creatively architect or show how a customer might use Azure in their environment for their specific scenario, because it's so custom. And so those types of things are still much, much better handled by our highly technical sales teams. And so we're not going to go solve that conversation piece, but we are going to solve the piece of, hey, let's just find out if this person wants to talk to somebody or not. So making sure that your scenario is suited for AI is very important. Also, third, a ton of value comes not from really creating something new with AI, but improving something that already exists. There was a book that I was reading a few months ago where the author said, I can tell you what the next 10,000 startups will be. It's going to be taking something that exists today and improving it with artificial intelligence. And that's really what we've done here. We've improved the process and moved it from humans to machines of determining if somebody is interested in talking to a seller or not. And we've improved the ability to get a lot more finite and higher fidelity in our lead scoring models. So really seeing, what are the levers that we can pull, and if we can pull them with AI versus trying to invent something completely new. I'd also say ensuring that customer experience will be great is very, very important as well. Making sure that you don't have that the AI is doing what you intended it to do. And the way that we do that is a lot of testing and monitoring and watching for things that might just not make sense. Fifth is, what about the prerequisites? So before deploying AI, I'll use the lead scoring as an example. When we first developed our models, they were flagging some really weird numbers. And the models were dependent on sellers picking the correct disposition of the lead. So was it a good lead or a bad lead, and why or why not? But we'd never really used that data. We never monitored that data. So a lot of the sellers were either picking random dispositions or just picking the same one every time. And so that didn't give us the information that we needed to train the AI. So we had to go work with inside sales and help them understand why it's important to start using these fields in CRM correctly, so that we could get the right data sets. That was another thing, data sets. They were kind of all over the place, and so we needed to bring the data sets together so that the AI could reason over all of the activities that the buyer was engaging in. Do you have data scientists? Do you need different UI endpoints? So one of the UI endpoints that Conversica has is it's able to show the notes. It's able to show the email conversation to the seller so that they have more context going in. So making sure that you have all of these things are very, very important. Also, AI doesn't have all the context. Be aware of things that happen that you might not want to happen. One example of this with lead scoring was that when we have forms on our websites that customers can fill out that when they want to talk to a seller, and we obviously want to send those to the top of the queue of the sellers. But we were having AI score those, and sometimes they would show up as medium propensity for some reason. And so what we found out very quickly was that we needed to say, hey, for these we call them contact me scenarios, let's just skip the AI and accelerate it directly to the top of the queue, because we're promising the person's raising their hand and say, I want to be contacted, and we're promising we're going to contact them quickly. And then finally, even a narrow, minimally viable product can make a big difference. We didn't revolutionize the entire end-to-end demand creation revenue creation process and change a bunch of things, we really focused on like getting the right leads in the right, like stack ranking the leads in the right order, and then automating the ask of the buyer if they're interested in talking to a seller. And those two things have made a tremendous difference, 30 to 60% increase in our sales qualified opportunity conversion rate. And so, you don't have to change everything. You just have to find the points of leverage and make the changes there. So with that, I think we're going to move into Q&A.
We are, and thank you, Charles. That was a really great presentation, and it generated a lot of questions from our audience, and a few things that I'd like to ask you as well. Let me just start out by maybe you could tell us a little bit about the implementation time frame. So you mentioned building the lead scoring and using machine learning and such. How long did you guys spend on that project?
Yeah, so we started a couple of years ago on it, and one of the reasons why it took so long, we just finally finished the implementation within the past 4 to 5 months. And the reason why it took so long is what I kind of alluded to earlier, is we didn't really have all of our prereqs set up. We didn't have the processes and inside sales set up correctly. We didn't have our data sets all combined together. So we spent a bunch of time getting all of those things in order, and then we were finally able to start applying the data science and AI components to it.
And what about the Conversica implementation? Can you share a bit with the audience how long that took?
Yeah, that one actually went much faster. From when we said go, it took about 6 to 8 weeks, I would say, from when we started working on it to when we first went live with our first implementation. When the customer first got their first email. And I think that's one of the advantages of buying a kind of SaaS product versus trying to build your own is it can be much faster. And then Conversica was also able to provide a lot of expertise and learnings from a lot of their other customers to help us accelerate as well.
Good point. I kind of wrote down 3 things that I captured as the key benefits around the bot piece. Let me know if I have these correct, Charles. So you already have leads that are scored high. If someone also says to the outreach from the assistant, Kristen, I believe is her name, if they say, yeah, I'd love to speak with someone, then that accelerates them even further up the queue, right?
That's correct.
The second one is that you have highly scored leads from the model. They may also respond to Kristen, but in this case, they might say, hey, I'm not interested right now. Contact me next month or later, and you're not wasting time from the sellers because you're going to move that down to the end of the queue. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then you had the third category, which you called the diamonds in the rough, which I love, great name, is the leads that were low scored, that were way down at the bottom of the queue. Someone would probably not reach out to them anyway, but when you had Kristen reach out, they said that they did want to speak with someone, they did have questions, wanted to learn more, and you move those up to the top of the queue. Did I capture that right?
Yeah, those are the 3 scenarios. So we'd say 1 and 3 really are about driving incremental revenue, and then the second one is about reducing costs and helping your sellers be more productive.
Yeah, which is a great segue to the next question, which is about how you are measuring this. So you talked just now and throughout the presentation about boosting revenue and decreasing cost. You also mentioned this notion of increasing capacity, and you showed that in your slides of just being able to do more with the human team. And how did you measure that? Did you have a sense of how long they were spending on processing a lead or contacting a lead before, and thus how much more capacity they could have after implementing these techniques?
Yeah. So I think the kind of uber metric that we're still relatively new and prolifically rolling this out across everything, and so and sales cycles are long. So the uber metric that we're going to look at once we have data and we've had enough time for opportunities to close on this is really going to be revenue per sales rep. And so we're trying to drive revenue per sales rep up. And the idea there is if we give them higher quality leads that convert more, the revenue goes up. And if we're giving them less bad leads, then their productivity goes up as well. Kind of in the interim, what we're looking at is the conversion rates of the leads that we send them to sales qualified opportunities. That's a big one. I'll also say that we did do some time and motion studies, and reps could spend anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour just trying to get through a lead to disposition it. And that includes trying to call the lead multiple times, custom craft an email and send an email, try to contact people through LinkedIn, and then sometimes they'll get on a meeting and the seller is like, no, I'm not really interested. I don't want to move forward with this. And so just every one of those leads that we don't have to and then not to mention them having to go into the tools and update things and disposition things. So every one of the leads that we can take out of that process that are bad, they're going to have to go through that, just adds more time for them to be able to sell.
That makes a lot of sense, and it kind of leads to the next question that I'm summarizing from the list here, which is, how did sales receive this? What was the reaction as you rolled out the scoring and the bot interaction to sales, and how did you kind of ensure that you had sales bought in?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the process of how we rolled it out to sales and a couple of options there, and then I'll talk about how they received it. So there's kind of two schools of thought around this, and I would encourage everybody to sort of think about their organization and what will make the most sense for them. I don't think either is right or wrong, but some organizations will just roll it out and have the assistant just start providing leads to sales and not tell them it's a bot. And what I hear is that the sellers are excited to get the leads because they're typically pretty high quality. And then when they hear it's a bot, they're like, oh, that's so cool, or they're very surprised. The way that we've done it at Microsoft is we actually go to the field marketing teams and the inside sales teams before we roll it out for a specific geo and product combination. We educate them on what they are and how to see the notes, etc. And the response is overwhelmingly positive and kind of hope and optimism. I would is how I would characterize it. And then one of the biggest, most valuable things that they've said that they, in addition to getting higher quality leads, was really the context that they get from the bot in terms of we're able to show them with Conversica the conversation that the buyer and the bot had. And in that conversation, a lot of the times the inside seller sees, oh, wow, I'm going to need a technical sales professional or a TSP on this call because there's going to be some technical questions, because the customer will respond with a lot of detail and a lot of questions. And so instead of having one meeting where they sort of say, okay, well, I need to schedule some time with the TSP, and then they'll meet a week later, they're able to bring the seller's able to bring the TSP in up front, and they're able to answer all of the questions of the customer right then and there. And that really does accelerate the sales cycle. And it reduces drop off because sometimes the customer might not make the second meeting, or priorities could change. So those are some advantages that we've seen, and that's kind of the attitude. That's how we've rolled out the bots, and those are the kind of responses that we've heard from our inside sales and the benefits that they've seen from them.
So it leads me to my question, and you alluded to this, but would they rather get the high-scored lead that hasn't responded to Kristen, or would they rather get the low-scored lead that Kristen has identified as a hand raiser that's ready to speak to them?
They'd much rather get the low-scored lead that has been identified by Kristen. In fact, some of them even say, "Can I just get these leads? Don't give me any other ones."
Just the Kristen leads?
Yeah, just the Kristen leads.
Got it. We have a couple questions about where you're applying this. Is it across all of your lead sources that you're using these techniques, or have you started with selected sources and you're growing into others? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the dimensions that we've used to roll these out on lead scoring and the bots are really are not from source perspective, but geography and product combinations, because that's how our sales teams are organized. So we've done a rolling plan across geographies and products. From a source perspective, the only source that we don't deploy these against is the leads that come from the website where the buyer fills out a form that says they want to be contacted by sellers, because those are, in essence, folks just kind of raising their hand and saying, "I'm ready to talk to a seller now."
And you don't waste any time. You get them right to the human.
Get them right to the human.
Another question is about your lead scoring sources, Charles, and clearly you're using first-party data about, the demographics of the person and company information and their behavior. What about third-party data? Are you using that? Are you using any intent signals? And what are, I guess, all of the you don't have to enumerate all of them, but what are the main inputs into the scoring model?
Yeah, so we buy a bunch of firmographic and demographic data. We buy a bunch of data that kind of normalizes and cleanses the data and tells us whether things are valid or not. So we do buy a fair amount of third-party data, and then we do buy some scoring, some companies like LeadSpace, Radius. We buy data from, and they help provide kind of curated scored signals into our other lead scoring models. But then we also combine that with our internal data around what people are doing across our marketing properties. So what events are they going to? What books are they downloading? What websites are they looking at? Those sorts of things. So those are the primary inputs into our scoring models.
And before you built your own kind of advanced scoring model in-house at Microsoft, were you using some of these third-party lead scoring solutions?
Yeah, we definitely were.
We
definitely were.
Okay.
And we would also combine them in a kind of the rules-based way. So we would get a propensity score from LeadSpace, for example, and we would say, hey, we're going to, which used all external data, and we'd say, hey, this can help accelerate, if it's a high lead score, it can help accelerate somebody who only did one thing internally versus them having to do 3 or 4 things, activities to cross the threshold. So yeah, we definitely did incorporate that. But again, it was still kind of in a really broad brush, low fidelity way. We still use those signals, but now with the AI-driven models, it's able to really understand the effect that those signals are having and apply them correctly.
I've got two more questions from the list I'll ask you, and then maybe you could take a couple of minutes, Charles, to talk about where this is all going next, kind of the future of AI in your marketing organization. Before you get to that, you mentioned a 30 to 60% improvement in the conversion rate of MQL to sales qualified opportunity. And you also mentioned, if I noted correctly, that you think you can boost that, maybe even double that or triple it. I think you said up to 150% increase. From where are you kind of willing to share what the conversion rates are today in terms of the absolute numbers and where they're headed?
Yeah, so I mean, it varies wildly. If you think about the products that we sell, like Dynamics CRM, Office, Microsoft Azure, so all of those have different buyers and conversion rates and sales cycles. So it's they're kind of all over the board depending on the profitability of the product and the capacity that inside sales has. But the average the range is between a 30 to 60% increase across those. So that's kind of what we've seen. And then as far as where we're going and how we think we can improve that, we're really kind of at V1 of the models, and there's more data sources that we can onboard. There's more internal data sources. There's more third-party data sources. Our hypothesis is that the more we sort of know about the buyer and what they're doing, the better we can predict when they're ready to talk to a seller or not. So adding those and then refining the models over time, we think that can help increase it. And then obviously with the bots too playing a big role, we think we can do some testing and things to optimize the copy and so forth. So we think by keeping working at it and optimizing it, we can get to those numbers.
Good luck with that, and we're looking forward to hearing you again with version 2. I guess my last question, I'll put you on the spot and say kind of what surprised you the most out of this whole process improvement program that you've been running, Charles? I think that it really works. You go into it with this hypothesis of, wouldn't that be cool? And sure, that we must be able to do that. But we've spent a lot of time and a lot of hard work and a lot of people here at Microsoft and Conversica and partnering with companies like y'all, and our hypothesis panned out, and we have seen some real business results. And because of that, the business is saying, hey, if we do apply AI to certain areas, we can really see material increases in revenue and decreases in costs. So it really has moved the needle. You think it can work, but when it actually works, it's like, wow, it did. It worked. That's probably the biggest surprise. These techniques and things aren't just window dressing and buzzwords, but they can make a material impact on the business, and we're seeing that firsthand. That's great to hear. I think the opposite would not have been as good to hear. But the biggest surprise is it worked, and it's really moved the needle. So that's my key takeaway. Do you want to share anything additional, Charles, about where you're headed with the program? Yeah,
so we've seen good successes leveraging bots, good successes leveraging lead scoring. Kind of the next thing that's cooking in the kitchen is we're starting to think about other marketing channels. So just for example, the way that a lot of companies, including us, email nurture or web nurture our prospects and leads is we'll say, okay, they downloaded this piece of content. Here's 10 other pieces of content in this specific order, and we're going to send it to them until we hear something different. And so, the journeys are kind of static and pre-programmed, Two, a lot of times the different channels don't have visibility to each other. So the paid media that we buy might not have a notion that this person went to this event that was interested in, cloud security or something, and that might not have a notion of what they're researching on the website. So really combining those data sources, reasoning over them, and then looking at the available content that you have, and then choosing from that available content what you think will drive the needle forward, and then surfacing that through the appropriate channel like email or paid media or the website is kind of where we're going. So taking these static pre-programmed silo journeys and making them more dynamic and based on AI reasoning over what people are doing, making them more unified and omni-channel. So having one common view of the customer and where they are, and then being able to execute against those. So that's kind of where our heads are right now and what we're thinking about tackling next.
Well, that's super ambitious. I wish you a lot of success on that journey, and hopefully you'll be equally surprised about the success you have there. Let's wrap up today's webcast. I want to thank all of you who've been listening in and contributing questions. We really appreciate your participation. Look forward to seeing you on the next in our continuing series about AI and marketing and sales. You've been listening to Charles Eichenbaum, Director of Marketing Technology at Microsoft. Charles, I want to say a big thank you to you for sharing this story with us and the audience. It's really a compelling and interesting story. So thank you for that. Can people get a hold of you if they have additional questions?
Yeah, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I love to talk about this stuff, so happy to chat.
Great. Well, there you have it. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's Conversica webcast, and we'll see you soon.